All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is September 20th of 2021. It is a Monday here. I hope you guys all had a great NFL Sunday yesterday. Probably was quite a bit better than mine. Had one of my worst NFL Sundays in a long time here from a DFS standpoint. So had a good day overall watching football, but definitely not my best day by any ROI metrics. But that is why we practice good bankroll management principles, good contest selection principles, live to fight another day, ready to rock for the showdown tonight. And of course, the next main slate coming up here. So that happens. I know there were a lot of people here in the NFL and the Office Hours channel celebrating a lot of wins this week. So congratulations to everybody that had a good week, but also some folks that were lamenting some losses and maybe didn't have the best week. Again, that happens, right? I didn't have a good week. Most of your weeks are not going to be good weeks. Most of your weeks are going to be losing weeks. We know that. We understand that. I have a video up on YouTube, on our YouTube channel here. Actually, I might as well, since I have it up here, I'll just pull it up. But since I've mentioned it, but this video that pops up here, MLB Office Hours, greatest hits. This video, what does variance look like after 100 slates? I basically set up this little Google sheet here that kind of simulates 100 slate sample sizes for a player using assumptions that would make that player a winning player long term, just to show you how variance looks. So if you haven't seen that, it's an interesting video. But I saw a lot of people talking here in Slack over the weekend about, didn't have the best week. What's going on? Didn't have the best week last week. I'm losing. What's going on? Right? Make sure that you're using strong bankroll management and contest selection principles. If you haven't seen it already, go and watch that video on our YouTube channel, because the goal here is to get through the season, right? And you play your main slates, you mix in some showdowns, you're playing whatever, right? You're really playing for your ROI to deliver on a couple slates this season. It's going to make your whole year. So be patient, right? And use strong bankroll and contest selection principles, and we'll all get there. So, but anyway, a lot to talk about here today. I'm sure I see a few people are trickling in here now. So welcome everybody. Happy Monday. I know what a lot of people are probably excited for is our giveaway drawing. I know that's probably what a lot of people are here to watch. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, this needs to be updated. I'll make sure that this gets changed, because this is all NFL season. Oh, this is actually the wrong one. Hang on. This is the one I was looking for. Boom. Cool. So yes, we are giving away prizes all NFL season. The requirements to enter this thing are to wear the SaberSim logo on DraftKings and FanDuel, to max out either the 50-cent mini max on DraftKings or the 5-cent pooch punt on FanDuel for the Sunday main slates, right? Two very important notes there. Maxing out the contest and making sure you're picking the one for the right slate. I know they do mini maxes and pooch punts for showdowns and Thursday to Mondays and turbos and afternoon slates and all these things. It is for the Sunday main slate. You got to max it out. And you email Andy at sabersim.com, a picture or a screenshot of your entries, some of your entries at least, with the SaberSim logo showing, and you get entered into this contest. And what does this contest do? Well, the highest scoring person that entered the contest wearing the SaberSim avatar here is getting extra prizes. Basically, you're going to get some free contest tickets, free month of SaberSim, and entry to a private free roll that we're going to run at the end of the season. So pretty exciting. Should you ever take one of these contests down, fingers crossed, I'm really hoping that we get somebody to take one of these contests down here before the end of the season. We'll give you a little bit of extra cash, a ton of extra SaberSim, and a custom championship belt or a trophy. And we're doing a drawing here every week, which is, I know, what a lot of the excitement is about, for 3 members of the Minimax and 10 members of the Pooch Punt here. You are going to get basically free entry to next week's contest. On the FanDuel side, I will mention a few of you guys probably already know about this now, especially if you won last week, but we are still working with our FanDuel rep here, trying to get this sorted out. So what we have been doing is these prizes here. So this $25 contest ticket and your $7.50 worth of tickets to the Pooch Punt next week, for now, can either be delivered just as cash to PayPal, via PayPal, or just deposited onto your SaberSim account as a credit against your next month's fee. So we're working to try to turn these into actual tickets with FanDuel. But I know start of the NFL season, those guys are super busy over there. It's been a little bit difficult for us to get that worked out with them. DraftKings, everything is exactly here as it should be. So people should be getting tickets as it is listed here. But and then of course the last note here is that if you do this all 18 weeks, right, you don't even really have to win. But if you play all 18 weeks here, we're going to give you some free prizes, some Yeti gear, more free SaberSim, and entry to that free roll at the end of the season. So this contest was not, we didn't just come up with this on a whim here. We didn't just make this up, right? We use the principles of what we recommend people do anyway to try to build a contest out of it to encourage it. So obviously wearing the SaberSim logo of the best DFS site out there, that's just something that everybody should do. But also maxing out these lower dollar entry contests when possible, right? We always say get as many lower entry fee contests as possible in the pool so you have the highest chance at a high upside lineup as possible, right? But also playing every single week and sticking to a similar strategy and contest every single week, right? These are all, this is kind of where this came from. So enough of me talking about this all. I just wanted to give a little bit more of a introduction maybe to people that don't know what's going on or haven't heard of this yet, but I know most of you are here probably for the drawing. So before we get into that, let me announce our winners here for this week. And I've got it right here. So on DraftKings, the highest scoring person that entered the contest this week was Kraken 1627. So you've won a ticket to a $75 single entry contest. I can't remember the name of that contest, but it's the $75 single entry that runs every week on the main slate. So we'll get you one of those. Free month of SaberSim. We'll get that applied to your account, and you are included into this $5,000 free roll at the end of the season. So it should be a lot of fun. Congratulations, Kraken 1627. Again, finishing 11th overall in the mini-max of probably, I don't even remember how big the contest was this week, but probably at least 300,000 or so lineups. So a fantastic score. And in the FanDuel Pooch Punt, the highest scoring total by a player that entered the contest here was S1 Lopes. I assume that's probably how that's pronounced, finishing 55th out of almost 1 million lineups. So congratulations, S1 Lopes. You will get, in this case, $25 either added as a credit to SaberSim or sent to you via PayPal as cash. A free month of SaberSim, and entry to the $1,000 free roll we're doing at the end of the season for the FanDuel Pooch Punt. So congratulations to our highest scoring winners. Again, 2 very high scores here, 2 very high scoring lineups overall. So I do think we'll get one of those winners taking down this contest outright here before the end of the season. Let's go ahead and get into the drawing now. So I know we had a little bit of a stumble with this last week, so I apologize again for those of you especially those of you that called me out live here on stream, and I didn't really totally see it, but all that ended up meaning is that we had extra winners last week, so maybe that's not so bad. But I did triple check this here this week, and we've got the exact correct information pulled down here. So for DraftKings, we have 72 total entrants here. So we're gonna do DraftKings first. I'm gonna copy this whole list here. Get everybody in. So we have 72 entries here. So all is well. Should have everybody in the list here. 72. It all looks good. Again, guys, we need those screenshots by approximately 1:45 p.m. Eastern time on Mondays. If you don't get them in time, you're going to be left out of the drawing, which is what we're doing right now. We will keep you involved for the full 18-week challenge if you just forget about it and get that screenshot to us a little bit late, but do need those screenshots by that time for the drawing. But anyway, without much further ado here, let's go ahead and do our first drawing for this week for DraftKings. So these 3 winners, we're going to do this 3 times, will all win 150 entries to next week's mini-max. That's about $75 worth of value. Get to play for free next week. So let's go ahead and do it here. And our first winner is, oh, it's close. Oakley357. Congratulations, Oakley. That's hard to say. My mind wants to say okay, but it's Oakley. Cool. Congratulations. 150 entries to next week's mini-max. We're going to go ahead and remove Oakley here. Let's make sure he got removed too. Yep. Cool. Cool. Let's do another one. And it's SportsFan14. Congratulations, SportsFan14 here. We'll go ahead and remove him here. Make sure that he gets removed. SportsFan. Yep. Looks like we're all good there. And one more here for 150 entries to next week's mini-max. Spin the dial here. And it's Toasted Taters. Toasted Taters was our overall winner last week of the highest scoring lineup in the DraftKings mini-max. So bit of a hot streak here so far. Congratulations, Toasted Taters. Play the mini-max for free in this week coming up. Go ahead and remove here. So our three winners here, Oakley357, SportsFan14, and Toasted Taters. Congratulations, guys. You'll play the mini-max, the 50-cent mini-max for free next week here on DraftKings. Let's go ahead now, and what we will do, let me copy these and just make sure that I've got a record of these on my end here, and we'll jump to the FanDuel one. The FanDuel's one is pretty fun because we get to spin this thing 10 times. So, all right, I've got that copied. I'm going to clear that, and we are good here. So on FanDuel, we had 70 entrants. So as long as I'm showing 70 here, when I copy this over, we should be good to go. That was the issue last week for those of you that watched here. I did not copy my whole list like a goofball. So 70 entrants, looking good. 70. We're pulling this thing 10 times, guys. The 10 winners are winning. Well, they're theoretically winning 150 entries into next week's FanDuel 5-cent pooch punt. But in reality, they're winning $77.50 as either SaberSim credit or cash deposited via PayPal while we work out this engagement with FanDuel. FanDuel's just been super busy to start the NFL season, so unfortunately, it hasn't been able to get this totally worked out with us, but that is okay. $7.50 works out one way or the other. So, but anyway, let's go ahead and get into this. So again, pretty good odds here, right? Pulling this thing 10 times, there's 70 entrants. You got a 1 out of 7 shot at this. Definitely just another reason to play some of these contests and join our giveaways. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into it here. Our first spin on the FanDuel pooch punt. And, oh, it's so close. Enemy Mine. Congratulations, Enemy Mine. Let's go ahead and get another one in here. We got 10 of these to go. Or, excuse me, 9 of these to go. We got 10 total. So let's keep it rolling. And it's Enlo Jr., I think another winner last week. Last week, again, we had 20 winners because of the mistake that I made here on stream. So Enlo Jr., I believe, won one of our entries last week. So congratulations again. Let's make sure that these guys are getting removed here. Yes. Okay. Spin it again. Oh, so close. The Ryuk's, I assume, is how that's pronounced. Congratulations. 3 winners so far here on the FanDuel side. And it's Raiden taking it down. Our 4th winner for this week. Coming up on our 5th turn of the wheel here. Guitar Bet 001. Congratulations. One of our winners of our inaugural or our very first giveaway this year for the NFL opening night showdown. So congratulations here. Our 6th spin. Big PLC. Congratulations. 7th spin. Oh, just on the cusp there. Working hard. I assume that's what that is. Working hard. Congratulations. And our 8th spin here coming up. We've got 3 more. Oh, man, right over. Havoc Warriors, congratulations. Our 8th winner. 2 more spins here, guys, for this week's drawing. All right, Timo 5544. Congratulations. And guys, coming up here, our last winner for this week. Again, it's only week 2. Plenty of time to keep playing. But for week 2, our last FanDuel winner here will be Bama Jones. And that makes 10. Our list of 10 FanDuel winners here for this week. Let me go ahead and just copy those and make a note of it on my end. All right. So, again, we'll make sure we get emails out to all of our winners here so that whether or not you guys were able to watch this video or not, that you won, of course. If you won DraftKings, either on the giveaway or in the case of I can't remember who it was, Kraken here, that actually took the contest down or had the highest scoring score. We'll reach out to you, let you know what to expect with getting your tickets. On the FanDuel side, we'll reach out to you guys I'll shoot you an email, let you know that you won, and give you an option. Basically, you can choose between collecting via SaberSim credit or PayPal cash, whatever's easier for you guys. So again, we're hoping to turn these into FanDuel tickets here as soon as possible. I think it's a little bit more fun, a little bit more in the spirit of the game when they're tickets rather than just cash or SaberSim credit. So we're working on getting that done, but they've just been super busy on their end. So we will do this way for now. But again, guys, it's only week 2 here. We've got 16 more weeks of the regular season here. So again, all you have to do to enter is use the SaberSim logo, max out the pooch punt or the mini max on the Sunday main slate, send Andy at SaberSim.com, an email of your SaberSim logo and your entries in the contest. Once the contest locks, basically before Monday afternoon, and you get entered in this for free. You get an opportunity to make your wins a little bit sweeter if you take the contest down or are the highest overall score here. You get to play in the giveaways to get an opportunity to play for free next week. So it is just a very positive EV contest to be a part of if you're going to be playing anyway. So we'll do it all over again next week. Already starting to look ahead at week 3. I'm not even kidding. I was in there looking at salaries this morning, seeing how the slate is starting to come together. So the weeks just come one after another here in football season pretty quickly. But anyway, this isn't all we're doing here today. So we've got office hours to do. So I'm going to go ahead and close out these here, guys, and we'll go ahead and pull up the app. Before we really kind of move forward and do office hours here, a couple other just quick housekeeping announcements, that kind of thing. This week's strategy session is going to be focused around the NFL model. Guys, I apologize, first of all, that this particular strategy session has gotten pushed back a couple weeks. The silver lining here is that the reason it has gotten pushed back is because the guys working on the model, like Matt and Will and everybody else on the SaberSim team, have been heads down making the NFL model as best as possible, right? So haven't had a chance to come on and talk about why it is so interesting and sophisticated on stream here yet, but that is supposed to happen this week. I believe we're targeting Thursday for that. So I know there was one question that popped into Slack this morning that I think is probably going to be a very good question for that strategy session. There have been other questions that have come up in office hours the past couple weeks about the model. So I have those written down as well. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I know our baseball model video, how SaberSim's MLB model works, that's up on YouTube, is one of our most popular videos of all time now. So I know you guys are really interested in this kind of thing. So it should be a lot of fun if you have questions about how the NFL model works. And just to be clear, when we say NFL model, we're talking about the simulator, right? The thing that is actually doing the simulations of the games that lead to you getting your projections, but also your ranges of outcomes and also your correlations between players, right? That is the NFL model. We are modeling, we are trying to create essentially a duplicate of the real thing. Obviously, a duplicate would be a perfect model. No model is perfect. But we're trying to create a very, very good copy of the NFL product within our NFL simulator, right? So that is basically what we're doing. But that's going to be a lot of fun, guys. That'll be on Thursday here. We'll have office hours today, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday this week. So if this is your first time tuning into office hours, first of all, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. I recommend you stick around here past just the drawing if that's what you were here for. This is a live open Q&A style show where I answer questions from SaberSim users about SaberSim, about DFS strategy, whatever you guys want to talk about. Sometimes we celebrate some DFS wins or tilt some losses in here, especially on Thursdays and Fridays when golf is going on. But you can ask your questions in through YouTube chat or the office hours channel on Slack, or of course, support email for SaberSim, support@sabersim.com, especially if you are watching these or listening to them after the fact, when they're not live, when they're up as recordings, and it's easier for you to just shoot us an email. That is totally fine. I go through with the help of Ross and Chris here to pick out some of our favorite questions that come in through email as well to talk about on stream. So that is perfectly fine. I know there are a ton of you guys out there that listen and watch this stream here after work or at the end of the day, in the evening, on your commute. I have heard from a bunch of users. So appreciate all you guys, however you go about listening to this show. First of all, let's turn dark mode on. This thing is blinding me here. I've got two screens. One of them is the actual SaberSim app, and one of them is the streaming app, and they're both just blinding me with the white background of SaberSim. So that is a lot better here. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. So first off, I have a handful of questions that came in over the weekend in support. So I'm going to dive into those first. Then I'm going to catch up on some questions that came in through Slack also over the weekend and this morning. And then we'll get into the questions live, guys. I promise I will get to everything here today. But I want to get the questions that were answered chronologically answered first. So please stick around. If you ask a question, I promise I will get to it before the end of the show here. And we will just start going through things. So let's go ahead and first tackle this question here. And this question was from Sean. And it's a good question. I think it's a good one to talk about. And he said, what's the best way to get variety, right? So yeah, we also call it like diversity in your lineups, right? Different pools of players, unique pools of players, lineups that are unique and different from one another. That is all diversity. That is all variety, right? So let's go ahead and talk about the best way to get that in our lineups and some of the ways that SaberSim kind of helps handle this for you out of the gate. So first of all, I think it is an important thing to note that diversity in your lineups is very tied closely to diversity or variance of a range of outcomes, right? The more variant players are, the wider ranges of outcomes are for the sport. The more diverse your lineup pools are probably going to be intentionally, right? We can't play. We may feel comfortable about a 100% exposure to a certain player if that player had a very thin range of outcomes, was not a very variant player, was very likely to score his projection, right? But for players that have wide ranges of outcomes, and most players in football do have wide ranges of outcomes, we can't go all in even on the best overall, maybe running back by projection most weeks, like a guy like Christian McCaffrey, who has this massive range of outcomes, right? There's a lot of different things that can happen. So we temper our expectations, we temper our exposure, and we build lineups with a lot of different running backs, right? That's why we have diversity. If there was basically no variance in the sport at all, first of all, you probably couldn't play DFS very well. Or if you did, you would just be playing who has the best projections, right? That wouldn't be very much fun. But because there is diversity, right? Because there is variance, we diversify our lineups. And all this is to say is that sim variance, the slider that is basically controlling the diversity of your lineups, is tied directly to the variance of the players. So this makes sense. This checks with our intuition, right? As we allow the players' wide range of outcomes to have a greater impact on the way the lineups are built via sim variance, right? When sim variance is higher, we use smaller buckets of game simulations to determine the projections for each player when we build the lineup. So at 10, we're using a single game simulation. The impact of that player's wide range of outcomes is at its maximum. You could get any one of their game sims, right? At 0, you're using the average projection. The impact of that player's range of outcomes and their variance is basically completely turned off, and you're going to get the highest projected plays at each position, right? See what I'm talking about here? Diversity of your lineups is closely tied to the variance of the sport, but also how much you're allowing variance to impact your player pool. So the higher sim variance is, the more diverse your pool is going to be. And this is probably the best overall way to get variety in your lineups, because it is not only it's not arbitrarily going to increase diversity. It is going to increase the diversity by allowing real ranges of outcomes to have a greater impact and a greater representation in your lineup pool. Your lineups are going to have additional upside while they are made more diverse, because we're leveraging the full and the ends of the player's range of outcomes more aggressively. So if you're doing a build and you're getting a ton of exposure to a certain player, or your exposures just look too high, or your player pool looks too small, the best thing I can recommend you do here is just turn up the sim variance slider. That's probably the best place to start. But there are other ways to get diversity or variety in your lineups, and there are reasons why you may not want to turn sim variance up, right? This is going to increase the diversity and the variety of your lineups, but it is also going to lower the impact of the average projections you are using. And maybe you're playing a contest maybe you're playing a small 20 max, maybe not something I would recommend, but sim variance is at 5. You don't need the absolute kind of optimal lineup to win a contest like this. You can rely on the impact of average projections more, and you want more diversity in your 20 lineups, but you don't want to be up in this range, right? Because you don't want to be playing that aggressive of kind of dart throw type plays. So how else can you make your lineups more have more variety, more diverse? Well, one of the ways you can do that is with min uniques, and that's probably the next best way to just force variety into your lineups. What this is going to do is this number determines how many unique players are there between any two lineups that are compared in the pool. So it's always 1. It has to be 1 for you to build a set of unique lineups. But I'd recommend experimenting with just turning this up to 2. I don't even know if you need to go much further than that, right? 3 is going to make your lineups probably very, very diverse. This is a flat, blunt way of forcing diversity in your lineups that doesn't really interact with the sims at all. It's not necessarily going to make your lineups better, or it actually just flat out won't probably make your lineups higher EV on an individual level, but it will spread out your risk a little bit more and make your lineups more diverse. So a very easy thing you can do is just set your min uniques to 2. Real quickly, I'm going to actually leave this at 1, and I'm going to talk about kind of the last way. Oh, I changed the DPI on my mouse. That's better. Okay, cool. The last way you can increase the diversity of your lineups is a more manual approach, and that is by editing your player exposures, right? This is probably the most granular way you could go about doing this, right? So increasing sim variance is going to be the way to do it. That's going to increase your upside. It's going to give you a little bit more of those dart throw type plays. I don't even like the word dart throw there, because that's not what they really are, but you're going to increase the upside at the expense of average performance, right? The average performance of your lineup will probably go down when you turn sim variance up. The second option is setting a min-unique level, which is going to be like this very neutral, forcing diversity way of getting variety and diversity into your lineups. That probably is going to have zero impact on your average performance or upside or expected value of those lineups, and just force EV. The final way of doing this here is by adjusting player exposures, and this is going to be kind of the most maybe ambiguous results on your lineups, right? Because it's ultimately up to you how you want to approach this. So you may look at a guy like Najee Harris and say 90%. Again, we're doing this retrospectively. I know it's always a little bit funny here to do this looking at our builds after we know how the slate plays out, but maybe you say that's too much Najee Harris, right? And you can, in effect, make your lineups more diverse just by lowering exposure to some of the plays that you have a ton of exposure to, right? That's maybe even too much Brady, right? So we're bringing some of these guys down, and we're going to, if we do this with enough players, increase the overall diversity of our lineup. So it's not going to happen every time, but you can see that this player pool is probably going to get overall bigger, right? And I'm doing this just blindly, just looking at players, their projected ownership, and kind of making some gut decisions, but you could do this with a lot more intention and maybe say that there's a specific reason that you're going to particular players or positions or teams and lowering your maximum exposure, in effect, making your lineups more diversified, right? This would be kind of the third way I would recommend doing this. So overall, what I would recommend to the average user is start with sim variance, look at your contest, increase your sim variance if you want to increase the diversity of your lineups a little bit more, run your build and see how the lineups look. And if they're looking like they are a little bit too contrarian or a little bit off the wall, or some plays that you're just not comfortable taking into the particular contest, what I would recommend then is experimenting with the min uniques as a way to increase the diversity without increasing sim variance. And editing exposures is just something that always makes a lot of sense to have in your build. I think pretty much everybody should at least be having a look at their exposures and consciously making the decision, even if you are using just default, even if you're just using default projections, default sliders, running a build, and you're ready to just enter those lineups, that's fine. But you should be consciously aware of the exposures that you're using with certain players. Because I think editing exposures up or down is a very good way to increase or decrease the amount of diversity in your lineups. I guess while I'm on that point, it is worth noting that I think if you wanted to contract your player pool, right? So if you wanted to lower the diversity of your lineups, you can't get lower than 1 here for min uniques. And I would highly recommend never turning sim variance down from where it is at the default, because what you are going to do is you are going to lower the upside of your lineups. You are going to increase the average performance. But the most important thing is you're going to lower the upside of your lineups, right? Which is actually, I think in this particular case, if you were building lineups for like the mini max or something like this, and you said my pool is too diverse, I want more of the plays I like the most, and you started to go like this, you are actually probably at that point directly impacting your EV of your lineups and building worse lineups. What you should do instead is, was this my build? I would say instead focus heavily on the exposure side of things and lower or remove players from your pool that, let's see, maybe wide receiver is a good example, that you're only getting a couple of anyway. So like maybe a very good way to tighten up your player pool at the wide receiver position would be to do something like this. Doesn't seem to want to tighten up too much here, but you do this enough, you should get a tighter pool. Maybe running back is a better example. Tighten up our running back player pool. Maybe we only play 4 running backs, something like that, you know? So, because then we're still playing with lineups that were built with a very high sim variance, increasing that upside in our pool. So that's what I would recommend. And again, this question was from Sean. Great question. Thank you for asking it. And let me know. I'll get you a timestamp recording to this section of the show, and let me know if that was helpful. And let's go ahead and keep it rolling, guys, here and talk about the next questions here. So this was a really good question too, and I think a similar question came in last week when we were on one of our strategy sessions here. But this was from Francis. And he said, my question is a longtime redraft and dynasty player that is still green to DFS. How do you know when to trust the data and when to trust your gut when the two conflict? That's a really good question. So first of all, I don't think there is any optimizer out there that is better equipped to allow you to even just go with your gut and intuition than SaberSim. And part of the reason why is because we simulate every game play by play and then use those ranges of outcomes that we have determined exist for any player on the slate, right? We're going to build you a very diverse pool of lineups, but we're also going to build you a pool of lineups bigger than what you actually request. So say you're playing 20 lineups or something like that, you're actually going to see that the default pool size here is 500. And when you build this, and I actually already have a build complete, so we'll just go ahead and bounce back to this one. But when you build this, we're actually going to build a pool of 500 lineups, even though you're only playing 20. You will see that the diversity of this entire pool of 500 lineups is actually really high. And there are a lot of different ways to go here. So you can, the way we like to think about this pool of 500 lineups is it is a pool of viable high upside lineups that fit the contest. If you want to take our favorite 20 sorted by Saber score, which is our way of quantifying how much upside a lineup has based on correlation, ownership, and the player's ranges of outcomes, right? You can do that, but you can also use this as an opportunity to kind of throw in some of your gut call plays, right? Let's go ahead and, like, for example, say that you were a bit of a savant and you saw and you knew that your highest exposure QBs, you wanted to be, I don't know, Kyler Murray. Okay, that didn't have the... Let's start with a fresh build because this one I messed around with a little bit here. Let's start with a fresh build overall. So I'm gonna run a fresh build and start over. And actually, I want to make sure that those slider settings are right. So let's go ahead and turn up. Let's say we're playing a contest like this, right? A little bit more of a diverse pool. So let's go ahead and look at this. We'll do this again here. But the point I am really actually trying to make here is that SaberSim is going to, we're building you a pool of 500 lineups from which you really only need to pick 20. And you can kind of check what SaberSim thinks is viable based on what is shown up in your pool of 500. So there's a lot of different ways to be viable. There's a lot of different paths to upside, and a good way to check with your gut or see whether it makes sense following your gut is to see what shows up in this pool of 500 lineups. So let's go ahead and start over here. And let's say, for example, at QB that you wanted to get some Kyler Murray in there. Let's go ahead and maybe take a little bit of a softer touch here and say 30%, right? Maybe you wanted a little bit more. So let's do the 50% thing. Okay, so we got 50%. And let's say that your gut was telling you Derrick Henry was going to score 182 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns this week, and you wanted a lot of Derrick Henry, right? Okay, so a very good way to check your gut, basically, is to play around with the exposures here in step 3. And if you see this message that says we need to expand the lineup pool, what this is really, what this should be saying to you is that the changes that you've made to exposures in step 3 have exceeded the first 500 viable lineups that SaberSim wanted to build. That might be an indication that maybe you should walk back some of your gut calls, right? Again, it's funny here with hindsight because we know Derrick Henry went off, but maybe one indication is that that's a little bit too far, or maybe it isn't, and maybe you tell SaberSim, no, build me some more lineups, right? So you say yes, and it's going to build more lineups, better emphasizing the players that you've increased your exposures to. You may sometimes have to do this a second time, right? So we're now getting a message that it's struggling to meet these things. So at this point, I would say what you have decided you wanted to do with your gut calls here is a little bit too much for the builder to meet. So you should go back here now. Again, you could also either just pull back on some of those gut calls or do things like increase the projection for the player or increase the minimum exposure to the player and run another build. But let's go ahead and bounce back, because my point here that I wanted to stress really was more about playing with this build and using it as an opportunity to kind of check your gut against SaberSim, right? You can kind of, again, take this as a way of almost asking SaberSim, is this viable, right? SaberSim saying, okay, here's the 500 best lineups you can make for your 20 max that you're playing. Maybe you're playing the quarter jukebox. Here's the best 500, and here's the best 20. And you say, okay, but what if I want to do like this stuff? How does that work? Saber, that's not right. Hang on. There's got to be, because we can definitely fade Najee. Okay, so you can say like fade Najee, right? Does that work? Give me some more Mixon. I have a gut call there, right? And you can kind of check your gut calls against the best 500 lineups that SaberSim is giving you. When you see the message to build more lineups and it says we don't have enough in the 500, you can either build more, you can go back to step one and adjust projections to increase projections of guys you weren't getting enough, lower projections of guys you weren't getting too much, or take that as an indication that it's time to pull back on your intuition, gut calls, things like that, because the model is in direct conflict with them. So I think that kind of like answers this question overall, right? There's not necessarily a right way or a wrong way to handle this conflict when there is conflict. I mean, maybe one thing to do would be to actually go research those particular players or games a little bit more and see if maybe there's something that you think the model's not taking into account, a possibility of upside on a certain player or something like that. But there aren't those situations. Actually, I think are fewer than people might initially think, because the pools of lineups that we're going to be giving you are very diverse by default. So hopefully that was helpful, Francis. If you have any follow-up questions, happy to talk more about that. Let's go ahead and keep it rolling here. And okay, so this was another good question here. This one was from Jason here, and I think a little bit more of an open-ended question. But Jason said, without putting in 150 entries, I have zero chance of success with any model. I like to play between 10 and 20 entries, time permitting, and even then it's a struggle. Do you have any advice for doing 10 to 20 entries? So let's talk about like 20 entry max kind of stuff. So again, I'm going to start with a new build here, just so we get a fresh start here. So the most important thing, and this question comes in a lot. We get this question from single entry players, from 20 max players, right? What should I do for my overall strategy for this amount of entries, right? And the thing I always say to this question is that your fundamental strategies, the concepts that you are applying to your lineups to make them successful, do not change between a single entry or a 150 max or a 20 max and a 3 max or anything like that, right? We want lineups that have high upside. How do we get to lineups that are upside? Well, we build lineups that are correlated, that have the right amount of total overall ownership, and that account for a player's real ranges of outcomes, right? Our 3 sliders, boom, boom, boom. And what you will see is that these change if you're playing 20 max based on the number of entrants. They change based on the entry limit. And these are actually back tested by building thousands of lineups here at each slider setting to determine what the optimal highest expected value lineups are, or slider settings are, at each different contest type. So first of all, if you were playing 20 max, I would very highly, or if you're playing anything, I would very highly recommend you just leave these sliders alone, right? We've already back tested and tested basically all the options here. This isn't a spot where I think you can add a ton of value. I would stick with the default sliders, but most of the 20 maxes on DraftKings, for example, look about like this. So let's run a build here and go from there. So the biggest thing here is that, at least like when I'm thinking about 20 max strategy, is you've got some opportunities given the multi-entry component of this here to add some Well, you've got some opportunity here to play the slate in a couple different ways, right? You're not locked into just one or three lineups. You have the opportunity to kind of like go for a few different angles, but you're not going to have as much ability as you do in like 150 lineups to play a lot of different angles, or I don't want to say play everything because that's not the point, but like leverage against a lot of different outcomes and things like that. So you have to kind of play a middle ground here with your 20 entry build. So what I will recommend, and every entry really has to count, right? Every entry always has to count, but when you're playing 20 max, like every entry is very intentional. So a few like 20 entry max specific tips that I would give. The first is to look at your leverage scores and make sure that the players that you are the highest leveraged on against the field, right? Leverage is exposure minus ownership. The players that you are the highest leveraged on against the field are players that you are intentional about doing so, right? That you feel like you are making a conscious decision, that you are going in and you're saying, I am 9 times as exposed to Tom Brady against the field, right? In other words, I think the field is maybe 9 times wrong on the way that Brady is going to perform on this slate. Well, if I was building this build, even if I liked playing Brady this week, I don't know that I need that much Brady action. And I might go in and adjust him down to something like 40, where I am 4x the field. Maybe a similar situation here with Najee Harris, that, you know, depending on the way you wanted to approach Najee this week, I know he was like the chalkiest running back overall. Maybe you wanted to be like more even with the field or something like that. Right. But focus on your leverage scores, because you really are going to feel every lineup that you use a player in 20 max. And I think you can also do this in the opposite direction, is look at your negative leverage scores, particularly for some of these guys. You know, maybe you want some CMC, maybe you want some Dalvin Cook, right? And you are fading them completely right now. But also for guys that are going to be down here, that you may think you might be able to kind of save a lineup with just a full fade. So on like a George Kittle lineup, we have one lineup with Kittle in it. I would be curious to see what this lineup looks like. You may like this lineup, you may not, but in a case like this, it may be an opportunity to kind of get you an additional lineup that, rather than saying I'm going underweight on George Kittle and I'm rostering him in one of my 20 lineups, I'm just going to fade, right? And maybe get you an opportunity to build out another, or to use a tight end as a part of one of your other stacks or things like that. So I guess like what I'm really trying to say overall is that look at your leverage column and treat it as a way of visualizing what your highest exposure plays are overall on the slate, and make sure that that is in line with the way that you want to attack the slate. I do sometimes feel like I hear from people that play a lot of single entry and 3 max, I feel like have a very clear idea of the way that they are attacking the slate, because you have to when you're building a single lineup or 3 lineups, right? You're having such this binary approach to the slate anyway, that you end up being able to articulate very well what you feel like your edge is in that lineup, right? And you don't have to lose that when you make the jump to single entry here, right? You should still have that. You should still feel like you are being intentional about your lineups overall. Is Chris Carson the best overall play on the slate? Like that is more or less what you are saying with this leverage column here. Is you're saying that you are most confident about Chris Carson more in your pool of lineups than any other player on the slate, and you should be intentional about that. You can still do that here with your 20 max lineups. So, the one other thing I'll note here, as if you're playing just 10 to 20 lineups, is that you can very much take advantage of our filtering. So we've talked a lot about this here on stream before, but you can filter these lineups, and you could look at, for example, lineups that pair. I don't know what would be interesting potentially, but maybe let's look at wide receivers, and let's look what are lineups that pair Robert Woods with I don't even know. For whatever reason, you might want to do this, but you're looking at Antonio Brown and Robert Woods lineups or something like that. Or I think maybe actually a more common reason would be to look at somebody like Robert Woods and look at other Rams receivers, like maybe Van Jefferson, and just confirm that they have the quarterback that's throwing the ball in that lineup. Another thing you could do is look at Chubb and maybe make sure that I don't know, that there are lineups that maybe aren't paired with Baker. Again, those players aren't correlated, so they're not going to show up often, but maybe you want Kareem Hunt in there instead of Chubb when you have Baker, and same deal. Maybe seeing how many, I don't know, other defenses are showing up. There's a lot of different reasons why you might want to filter and go through your lineups here and just kind of take a closer look. Another way you can do this is to look at, for example, Stephon Diggs lineups that don't have Josh Allen. In this case, there are none, but you can do this reverse filter. You could look at Antonio Brown lineups that don't have Brady. There are 2, right? You could see, or 3. There are 3. You could go here and determine that those, make sure that those are actually lineups you want to play. For example, when you're playing just 10 or 20 lineups, you have you can do this in a more intentional way and a more practical way. Like you could remove lineups that have Antonio Brown that don't have Brady and refill. Oh, whoops. Oh, I pressed the wrong button. You could go through here and do that don't have that don't have Brady. Fill, yes, clear filters. Okay, maybe a minor bug here, but let's just fill. Okay. But you get the idea, right? And when you have 20 lineups, you can actually do this. When you have 150, I don't know how realistic it is that that you can dive into the filters a bunch and get a lot of value out of filtering your lineups because you have too many lineups to look through. But with 20, you can. So great question here from Jason. And last question from the support email inbox, guys. I know there are some questions that are coming in here now through YouTube chat and through Slack. So I promise we will get to everything. And I promise I will get to everything here. So if you've asked a question, just stick around with me. Hopefully this is helpful to you anyway, and we will go from there. So let's go ahead and look at this last question. And this one came in from Daniel. And this is another good one about late swap. Okay. Daniel said, guess what I was trying to ask is, what do I do when I need to late swap different types of GPP contests? So like if I have entries in a contest with fewer than 10,000 effective entrants and entries in a contest with more than 100,000 entrants, I'd want to run the late swap to run for each type of GPP. I wouldn't want it running a GPP late swap on the entries for under 10K. Entry contests using the settings for 100K or greater, because the settings would more likely be more extreme. Yes. So I get what you were saying here. This is a good question. Let's go ahead and pull up the entry editor just so we can, I have some, you can't late swap a single game showdown, but for this contest, I at least have entries in here. So we can go ahead and pull this in. I think I've got some entries here for tonight so far. Okay, cool. Yeah, so the idea here is like, I mean, I guess let's just say you hypothetically could somehow late swap a single game, right? I've got some single game contests in here. I've got 20 maxes. I've got 3 entry maxes. And regardless of the way that I get my initial lineups into these contests, should I want to come over and late swap, these build settings, actually for a single game, they're not going to be that different. But for a main slate where you can late swap, the sliders are going to be very different. And you probably did different things to build these lineups, right? How do I go about late swapping my builds and running different late swaps? So there's a few things to note here, and it's really going to depend on how much time and how granular you want to get with this. I would say for me personally, I am most of the time just comfortable running one big late swap, picking sliders that are somewhere in between the different slider values for the individual contests I'm playing, or alternatively, I will pick maybe the sliders that correspond to the contest where I have invested the overall most money, and just living with the idea that the sliders are set at maybe slightly suboptimal levels for the other contests in your pool. The slider differences of just even just like 2 in either direction don't have an enormous impact on your build that you're going to get, especially in a late swap build where the original lineups themselves were already built to the correct settings that you wanted, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with doing it this way. And especially with late swap, a lot of times you have to get this done quickly. I think the easiest thing to do is to just do one late swap build that has all of your lineups in it. Honestly, I typically just end up building all of my lineups together and filling them uniquely for most contests. I think that is also completely fine. But even in the case for late swap here, I think this is the easiest and most efficient thing to do. But if you want to have a unique late swap build for every single contest type or just groups of different contest types, what I would recommend doing here is using the checkboxes. So you could identify, for example, just your 20 max contests and pick these and say, I'm going to do a late swap and I'm going to swap these lineups for the 20 max settings, and I'm going to late swap. This says late swap 1 lineup because I have only reserved these contests, even though I always tell people on stream here every single day not to just reserve. Here I am doing it again. So that is one way to do that. And you could late swap. You could build this late swap. It's only going to late swap the ones you selected, and you could actually even from there just download those lineups directly from the pool, and then move on to your next one. So maybe you do all of your, I don't know, 3 entry and single entry lineups like this. You could do like that. For example, take your 10 3-entry max or your single entries and late swap those. Right? Sliders are going to be a little different. Lineups you're going to get are a little bit different. And that would probably be the easiest way to do that. And I don't think that's going to add a ton of additional time, to be honest, especially because in a late swap build, you're not doing very much on the post build phase, right? You're just you're just basically just taking what you get, right? There's not really much to do here on the post build phase. So that's probably the easiest way to do that. But again, I think for the interest of time and the value you're adding there, I don't think you're going to add a ton. And I think the easiest thing to do is to just late swap all at once. But Daniel as well, let me know if that was helpful. I'll get you a timestamp recording to this stream here. If you have any follow-up questions, anything confusing there, just reach out. Happy to dive in a little bit more there. So a good question for sure. Quickly, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to some questions here that came in over the weekend or here this morning. This one, there was a note here from James here, and I think maybe I don't know, maybe this question was kind of meant a little more generally, but first of all, James looked like had a profit here in the mini max, which is great, right? Anytime you're profiting at all, beating the rake, right? That's a great outcome for you, and it basically gives you the opportunity to, especially a profit of like what we're like looking at here, which was like probably an 80%-ish ROI. Like that's a great outcome. Lets you play for free this week and halfway play for free next week, right? While you're kind of chasing that like big takedown, that top 1% kind of takedown. But then James said, can we dissect these builds and see what I could have done to make them optimal? And Cody like basically took the words out of my mouth here with his response that he wrote. And he said, it's dangerous to try and retroactively look at results to be optimal. You basically want to see if the reasoning behind your decisions you made were sound. Yeah, I can't I don't think I could say that better. I completely agree, right? Like we could sit here and say, okay, like let's pull up any 150 lineups you made for this week's slate and see what we could have done to make them better, right? And if we're judging that by ROI or profit, right? When we define better, it's very easy to do that and very unhelpful, right? How do you make 150 lineups that you entered into your contest better? Well, probably play 150 lineups with Kyler Murray and Rondale Moore and Derrick Henry. And then your lineups are going to start to look really good. And I know that's kind of like, okay, yeah, Jordan, like that's really funny, right? I get it. But like even if you try to take one step back and start hyper analyzing, like, okay, well, Chris Carson was chalk, so Derrick Henry went off and was the running back on the other team. So maybe play the running back on the other team when there's a chalky running back. Well, maybe, right? There's going to be slates where that's going to work. There's a lot of variance baked in there. Those two players are often negatively correlated, right? There's maybe an argument there to be made, but you're still kind of retrofitting a set of lineups and trying to find rules that worked on one particular slate. Or Kyler Murray was the highest overall quarterback on the slate. Like, I should have exposure to the highest overall quarterback, or not the highest salary overall quarterback on the slate. I should always be some exposure to the highest salary quarterback. Well, again, maybe, I don't know. What if he was 10K, right? What about when he's 9K? What about when it's not Kyler Murray? Right? You're retrofitting these results to rules that would have worked on one particular slate that improve your performing ROI on that slate, but you don't get anything out of that. Way more interesting is going to be looking at your decisions you made, exactly as what Cody said here, and ask if they, I don't even know. Like, I wouldn't even be too results focused here. Yeah. And exactly what Cody said, right? See if the reasons you made your decisions were sound, right? Like, for example, one of the things that I did on this slate, was, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I mostly kind of faded the Chargers Cowboys game, and to try to leverage against that situation, I played a lot of the running backs. So I had Zeke and Eckler, who had decent days, and the passing game kind of failed. And I treated that basic decision-making kind of matrix that I had there as mostly successful, actually. Like, the event that I was hoping for more or less took place. The passing games kind of failed. Zeke was outshined by Pollard, but Zeke actually did have a good game, and Eckler had a pretty decent game overall. Again, neither player had like that absolute ceiling performance. There were other running backs on the slate that did, and I had not a very great Sunday from an ROI standpoint, but I felt like that decision was sound, and it actually kind of did work out for me. And the game script that I felt was possible there took place. So I felt kind of good about that decision making. And again, that, even now that I'm talking through this, might be a little bit too results focused for me. But that's kind of the thinking that I think is a little bit more helpful, is go back and look at the decisions you made. Another one is that I thought Noah Fant was going to be over-owned at the tight end position, based on the research that I was doing. And what I wanted to do, well, I wanted to be underweight on Fant. And one of the things I toyed with for a long time was basically the idea that the Denver Broncos offense was a strong play, but Fant was over-owned. And when I'll show you exactly, just since now that I'm talking about this, I'll show you what I actually looked at here. But one of the things that I was very close to doing, and I didn't, and I wish I did. This is an opportunity of something that I kind of wish I did. So I was under on Fant, but I wanted to look at additional ways to kind of leverage against that. So I was looking at players that are negatively correlated to Fant, and I saw basically first here were the Broncos pass catchers along with Melvin Gordon. So I ended up playing a little bit of Melvin Gordon, which wasn't great, because my reasoning was that, well, okay, like, I'm going to fade Fant, but I'm not going to have the time to like go through and make sure if I emphasize Sutton or Patrick lineups that they don't have Fant. I clearly could have done that if I had just invested the time to getting that done. And I actually think that was kind of sharp. Like, Fant caught a touchdown and had like 40 yards and was a decent overall scoring tight end. But I think, again, this is a situation where the leverage play actually kind of worked, right? I was asking myself, okay, what happens when Fant fails? Well, maybe one of these 3 or 4 guys really go off, right? And I was kind of there. I picked the guy that was, again, probably fine. Melvin Gordon's negatively correlated with Noah Fant. It makes sense that he might succeed if Fant fails. But I don't know. I basically just skipped the opportunity of playing a guy like Sutton or Tim Patrick, who both had good days, right? The Broncos stack was actually pretty viable, just because I don't know. It was, I guess, kind of lazy. I just didn't want to try to make those lineups that had Sutton or Patrick with Bridgewater without Fant. And I probably could have. But anyway, just kind of talking through some of the things that have been on my mind this morning about ways that I could have improved my process, that are not like, I'm still obviously kind of thinking about results here a little bit. because it's hard to not. But you don't want to necessarily just be like, what were the steps that I could have made to make my lineups better without just like going in and looking what the highest scoring plays on the slate were and trying to fit them back into your lineups, right? So anyway, but good question from James there, and a very good answer from Cody. So thank you for sharing that, Cody. A question from Berard here in Slack, and this is one that I think is going to be better for the NFL model strategy session. He said, how frequently is the team backtesting the model for ownership and point total projections for NFL, for instance? So on the projection side for player projections and team projections, pretty much every single time we make a change to the model of any kind, something that we are trying to improve or model better, Matt and will come on here on Thursday and talk a little bit more in detail about what some of those things have been for this NFL season, but we will run back tests and make sure that it does indeed make things better. If it doesn't, first of all, we won't add that to the model, but most of the time we end up diving back in and working a little bit harder on it, making sure that we understand better and that it is making our model better when back tested against past seasons. So almost, I would say, very nearly constantly, especially early in the season and leading up to seasons. As seasons wind down, like for example, with baseball right now, there's not, to be completely honest, a ton of active model improvement work going on baseball. We are continuing our manual model like adjustments and review every day to make sure that the model we have is picking up on as much as possible and making improvements to it like manually through our review process here every day before the slates. But there's not a lot that we're like actually working on building into the baseball model right at this moment, for example, like in the middle of football season with basketball coming up. But early before the season and early in the seasons, like I would say it's nearly constant testing and improvements to the model. The ownership model itself, I think, is a little bit more of an interesting one. And it's a model that we plan on. It is on our radar to improve and to make some adjustments to here, I would say, in the near future. What it does right now is it takes our projections, runs thousands of lineups at maximum sim variance, and the exposures to certain players in those thousands of lineups roughly become the ownership projections. There's more behind the scenes that happens besides that, but that is a rough approximation of what happens there. And it's something I talk a fair bit here about some of the limitations of the ownership model. On stream, and we're aware of those limitations. So I think that's something that we plan on kind of making some improvements here too soon. So, but I am going to write this question down as well because I would like to hear what Matt and Will think about this or how they would respond, because they are the ones getting their hands dirty in the back end of the model a little bit more often. So, okay. Cool. Let's go ahead and keep rolling, right? Not done yet. A question from Ryan came in here right at the start of the show. This is the last question I have in Slack, and then we're going to rip through all of the questions that we have in YouTube chat. Ryan said, if I make manual adjustments to team totals and apply to the projections way before the slate starts, the example being several hours before the MLB slate or the night before an NFL slate, will that update be considered when SaberSim updates projections? No, it will not. And it will not in a very specific way that is important for people to know. So if you are going in, is week 3 up yet? I wonder if we've simmed week 3. We have. That's awesome. Okay, cool. So time to start building lineups. No, not really, but maybe. If you ever see this too, by the way, this means that what actually we haven't really completely simmed this. This means we don't have the team totals yet, so it's pulling in money lines here and populating them as the team totals. I know this is confusing. We've logged this as a bug on our end, and we'll fix it. But I just wanted to explain what that is, what you are seeing here. But anyway, I guess we've got decent enough projections of a couple games here to look at this. So if you go in and adjust player projections or team totals here, and then we resim the game later, right? So you do that. We're not going to adjust your custom projections. We are just simply not going to touch them. Even if we've resimmed this and Baltimore has jumped to a 35-point total, against the Lions, we are still not going to touch your custom work, right? We don't want to overwrite anything that somebody did custom on accident ever. So that is important, a very important thing to note. I would say anytime, it is totally fine and highly encouraged to go in and run builds ahead of time, do your research, start messing around with things whenever we start having projections in the week for games. But if you are going in and going to start like fresh, I would just recommend resetting all, like you saw I just did, every single time you show up to do stuff, right? If you've done a ton of work to set projections and exposures and things like that, and you don't want to do this, that's one thing. I would probably say you might be maybe investing time too early in the week if that's happening often. But more often than not, in general, for the average player, go in and reset everything to defaults. When you are like, if you messed around with projections on Thursday night and then you're signing on Saturday night, just reset everything. Get the latest SaberSim information and then start making adjustments again. So, cool. Okay. Good question. And let's go ahead and look at the YouTube chat here and catch up. Few people excited here. At the start here, a couple of people saying no Henry, others saying they had Henry. So yeah, it kind of ended up making your week a lot here. Clement said, when you run 20 lineups, how can I view all the lineup and my pool? So first of all, you can only do so on the SaberSim Advanced plan. If you are on the starter plan, you are limited to building just 20 lineups. We will still build you your pool of 500 here. But when you build your 20, I don't even know if this is going to work actually, because we don't have, this is week 3. But when you build your 20, you're only going to be able to see your 20. You can still edit your exposures and things like that, and even filter your lineups and like get your favorite 20 that you want to actually play, but you can't view the entire pool of lineups. You can't download the entire pool, anything like that. You need the advanced plan, because then essentially you would be, you could build 150 that way, right? So the starter plan is 20 only. You can't see your entire pool. Again, really intended for people that are playing 20 or less lineups on a slate. If you are, I know there are a few users out there that are using the starter plan and running multiple 20 max builds and kind of slamming them together to be a 150 max build. And that's fine. But I would say I highly recommend, if you're playing more than 20 lineups on a slate, to give the advanced plan a try. It will probably, for the increase in price, will save you at least that much amount of time and add that much additional value to your process. So, but I guess assuming that you have the advanced plan, all you do is change this. So how can you view all the lineups in your pool? I guess there's a few ways. One way is you could change this to look at like your entire pool of 500 lineups and go in here and look at it this way. You can also just click pool here, which is right next to my lineups pool. And this is going to show you like the entire pool of lineups. And after you get past the first 20, it's going to be showing you lineups that are not in your pool, right? So this is like the next lineup that didn't show up in your top 20, but maybe you could have played, is this one. So it looks like we only have 2 games simmed so far. We have the Chargers and Chiefs and the Ravens and Lions for next week. So that's why it's just all those players showing up. But like, this is how you view your pool. So cool. Let's see. Aaron said 4-2 or 5-1 for showdowns. Not a fan of 3-3 on DK. Why not? I'm curious about that. I don't like these rules of thumb in general. I think for those of you guys that are watching me here a lot, Aaron, I know you're here all the time, but I don't like these rules of thumb. I think, slates, salaries, contests, there's so many different variables that I think rules of thumb that try to simplify things just kind of dumb things down. Wouldn't surprise me if 3-3s are more popular roster constructions, but probably won't be tonight, right? 5-1 Packer stacks, 4-2 Packer stacks are by far going to be the most popular tonight. So I guess you could say that you would get like crazy leverage playing 4-2 or 5-1 Lion stacks, but I don't even know if you need to go that far. I don't really look at for showdowns in particular, I don't often look at the actual stack types I'm getting here. I don't know. I haven't personally found that there's like a lot to get out of being in here messing around with this. Let's go ahead and adjust these. I think there's maybe a leverage argument to be made here that maybe one of these types of stacks are very highly likely to be owned based on like what the Vegas total is. So I do think like an interesting thing would be to like look at, right? Like if you have 55% Green Bay stacks and 5 stacks and 25% Green Bay 4 stacks, right? Like maybe this isn't appropriately leveraged against the field. Maybe you could do a little bit more here, but I think that's like one step removed from just looking directly at the players, which I think would be way easier, at least for me to think about. Like it's easier for me to look at the players and be like, there's no way I'm playing 55% of Aaron Rodgers, who is like probably going to be maybe the chalkiest overall captain, second only to Devontae Adams. Like I am maybe doing this, and I'm also maybe doing this, right, to get some diversity in here and at least start having kind of an interesting conversation about how I want to approach the slate. I think there's like an argument to be made that maybe you could do a similar thing here. Like maybe I would do even like that. And I don't know. I can't even really think about like what appropriate exposure is to these stack types here, because this just isn't how I really like go about it. But what I wouldn't do, I'll answer this question this way. I wouldn't do like, I don't know if I'm on board with like this, because I don't know what you are getting out of that, or I don't know why you would do that. I think there's an argument to be made that flipping the script on your team stacks of what the game total is expected to look like, or what Vegas thinks the game is going to look like, right? And what the field thinks the game is going to look like is interesting, but blindly fading a certain stack type here is something that I'm a little less on board with. But Aaron, I'm curious also to hear like what your thinking is with that, because there might be something I'm missing. So, okay. Mike said, for showdown slates, how come I can't seem to sort my lineups by a player's MVP unless I'm doing it wrong? MVP. Let's go look at FanDuel here. And maybe we can take a look at what you are seeing here. So one thing, again, on FanDuel, this comes up a lot. I've had a lot of questions about this lately, but because you're not paying more to roster a player at the multiplier positions, right? That's a contest rule that FanDuel has here. You're going to see much more condensed MVP pools, because the builder, and frankly, like I agree, thinks that the optimal way to play is to just pack the highest projected overall player into the multiplier position most of the time. So you're going to get a lot of quarterbacks there. You're going to get a ton of Devontae Adams on slate like this. Like I wouldn't be surprised if our entire pool almost is just Rodgers, Adams, and maybe Aaron Jones showing up in the captain spot, because they're the 3 highest projected guys. So we do have some Goff and some Swift, which is good. But again, you're not paying more to roster these guys at this position. So it almost always makes sense to play the highest projected players in the MVP slots. So for this question, how come I can't seem to sort my lineups by a player's MVP? I should happen by default. These are sortable columns. So you're sorted by exposure by default here. And yeah, that should be by default, but Mike, I'm pretty sure I'm misunderstanding what your question is here. So if you are still watching, I hope you are, let me know if I'm missing something here. Or sometimes other people in the chat have been able to understand what people are asking a little bit better than I can. So if this sounds familiar to anybody else, or somebody else has run into an issue that sounds similar to this, let me know. Sort lineups by a player's MVP. Yeah. So it should be, again, it should be sorted by default here. I'm wondering if maybe there's something on step 1 that I'm missing. But again, all this should be sortable. If you just click these header columns, you should be able to sort really by whatever you want here. So, oh, okay. Mike's still here. Yeah, when I click on the search by Swift as captain, oh, that's a bug. Yeah, okay. So yes, that is on our list. That came up last week. So the issue here, right, is that if you click, for example, Aaron Jones captain, you're going to see him show up in a bunch of also any flex spots. So yes, I know that is annoying. That is a bug, and we are working on getting that fixed. So yeah, he's going to show up in both. I think there's maybe a way to kind of, let's see. No, that doesn't work. Yeah, it's just, yeah, that's a bug. And I apologize about that. I know that makes it a little bit difficult to filter by certain players right now. But yeah, we will get that fixed. But good question. Yeah, I guess one thing. No, okay. That's not going to work. Okay, cool. But yes, so that is a bug. We'll get that fixed. Joel said the default used to be 1,500 lineups for 150 max. Now it was 500. Was that a performance decision or a strategic decision? As you said, gut check. It's not strategic. I believe really that what we found here, and I'm not positive about this, so I'll go back and double check on this answer. But what I believe led to this decision is that most of our builds we were showing there really wasn't a reason to have people build. Like, people weren't making enough changes in step 3 to necessitate 1,500 lineups. So we made the default 500. That said, I mean, you can just make this 1,500 and build 1,500. But in the interest of kind of making the experience for the average user as best as possible, you save a lot of time in the build by making it a 500 lineup build instead of a 1,500 lineup build. And we were finding that people don't need the full 1,500 lineups very often. So, but good question. And again, yeah, this is not gone. You can still do 1,500. I do a lot of my builds on 1,500 because I make a lot of exposure edits, but I also like just having extra lineups in there. So no problem there if you want to go and do that. But a couple comments from Sheets here. He said, I've made this comment before, but for the new NFL people, I cannot stress enough that if you tweak to the point where SaberSim asks to build more lineups, then your tweaks are probably just bad. Sad face, he said. Of course, bad is not a great word, but I will just say that you're asking for trouble. Yeah, so I do feel like that is a very strong point overall. I've mentioned that here on stream before. I think this is calling back to the question about using your gut and your intuition. Yes, I would say in general, I would recommend that if you are making changes or enough changes that SaberSim says you need to build more lineups, exactly as Sheets said here, you are probably doing too much. Probably. Now, because I chose to pick 2 players that with hindsight had absolute ceiling games in Kyler Murray and Derrick Henry when I was going through that example, it does feel a little bit awkward to look at the camera with a straight face here and say that those changes are bad. But yeah, I mean, essentially that's what the model is saying in that particular case, that if the slate had played out 100 times or whatever, that those would have been poor decisions. And I think that's a good benchmark, a good bar in general to say that if you're getting the message to build more lineups, it's probably a good sign to stop and go back and slow down and maybe remove some of your exposure edits. And if you really want them to go back to step 1, update projections and build a better lineup pool for yourself. So, cool. And then Sheets also said, same comment, leave the sliders alone for the most part. I consider myself semi-expert and would put the SaberSim default sliders over anything I could customize for NFL. Yeah, I agree as well. I rarely touch the sliders for anything other than to run my research builds, which are typically like this, so that I can just kind of see what exposures look like. But again, guys, like the back testing we've done here on these, to the volume of lineups we've built at every single slider combination is more lineups than you could realistically play in a very, very long time. Like a lifetime of DFS potentially. So there's no reason really. I mean, you can adjust these things if you have intentional reasons behind them, I would say. But even then, it's a stretch. And I would say this is probably the last place I would try to add value in the SaberSim process overall. Let these sliders be. So a couple comments from Don here, also on the gut. Don said, I think another way to test your gut is to look at the exposures of your pool of 500. It gives you an idea of the quality of your gut. Yeah, exactly. I think that's also a really good point. Again, calling back to this conversation, and I should have seen these comments earlier. I'm sorry, guys. I did not have my eye as closely on chat here today, but would have liked to have pulled these up on stream when I was talking about these questions. But again, talking about gut, right? Maybe you want to play... oh, this is that build. I have some exposure settings in here that are causing problems, but you could look at your entire pool of 500 lineups, right? And use this as a tool to see like how many different pathways do you have to rostering a certain player? How many different lineups of your pool have that player in it, right? We only have 7% Dalvin Cook, 5% Joe Mixon, right? If your gut is telling you like these are the plays, your pool of lineups that you have to roster them is somewhat limited, right? This can be a good way to check your gut as well. So, I saw this comment come in, Cody, here. Works when you press never mind. I will just take a look on that and do some testing on my end. It might be a small bug on our end as well. Eric said, is there an easy way to see what late swap changes were made to your lineups? Oh, man, I believe there is, but I'm not going to have a slate I can give you an example right now at the moment. But what should happen is yeah, here. So like what should happen is when you run the late swap build. Actually, okay, let's do this. Let's do this real quick. So I'm going to just build 70 lineups for the Showdown. I think I can still demonstrate this. And I need to get lineups in anyway, because these reserved entries are going to be the death of me here. Okay, so let's go ahead and get these in. Okay, so now let's do this. Okay, so it should now let me late swap, because now I have entries in. Okay, so when you late swap, let's rebuild. Okay. Oh. That has changed and I didn't notice it. On the classic, I will, Eric, I'm going to have to go back and talk to the team here and see if this was like intentionally removed or if this was just maybe kind of forgotten here. But there used to be a, yeah, the old version did have a way to see them. And what's weird about this page is that this doesn't like, I wonder if this has something to do with the fact that this is like, because like this is a weird interface too. Does this even do anything? Probably not, right? Yeah. Okay. Let me make a note here. Let me make a couple notes here. So we have the filter by MVP. We have the have to clear filters never mind thing, and also the late swap changes. This just interface just seems weird too. Like this isn't necessary. And yeah, the old way definitely had a way to see changed and unchanged lineups. So, I mean, for what it's worth, this is still up. I believe. Yeah. So this is still up. So you are welcome to still use this. Except I'm going to go back. So yeah, good question. And I'll talk to the team about that and see what's going on there. So, okay, let's keep going. Oh, yeah, I saw this comment from Dion here. Sutton was so obvious if you didn't play fan. Yeah, I guess so. It's not where my head was originally at, and that's not where I ended up, unfortunately, because I could have used him. But definitely, they are negatively correlated. So it did make a lot of sense. But Olivio said, SaberSim is awesome. Appreciate that. Oh, I missed this comment here from Cody. It would be good to hear about how to deal with lineups that underperform and perform well in the early games. You said before it doesn't take into account results from the early games when using late swap. Yeah, so again, the late swapper isn't going to know that while the slate's in progress, not in a way that it's actionable. Even once we have actual scores populating, right? It's not going to know what to do with a lineup that's underperforming versus overperforming. What I would recommend if you need to late swap, I mean, so there is some value to doing some of that by hand, especially like if you have some high dollar single entries or things like that, right? It may be easier for you to just handle if you have maybe your highest dollar single entry or your single entries in general, right, are underperforming projection halfway through the slate. It may be easiest to actually just do a by hand adjustment and get off of the chalkier players in the late game and put in some lower owned players, right? I actually think there's a lot of edge there. And I think you may be able to do that easiest and most consistently to get that exact result in those exact lineups that you want just by doing that by hand. If you wanted to take an approach of doing this within SaberSim using the entry editor, one thing I'll note here is you don't have to upload all of your entries here in the entry editor. So, for example, you could take your entry file and let's say I wanted, again, this is a showdown slate for tonight, so this isn't fair, but let's say, for example, that I only wanted to late swap. Well, really, actually, the easiest thing to do would be to just take, like, if you only wanted to late swap your single entries or something like that, and your single entries were underperforming, one way you could kind of get the effect of this within SaberSim would be to run a late swap for the entries that you've selected, and they're all underperforming. So you're going to kick up ownership fade heavily, like maybe really heavily, right? Depending on how bad they're overperforming, and late swap those lineups that you know need to get off the chalk because they've underperformed. Or vice versa, if you have lineups that have low owned players in the early games that have already like had their 95th percentile outcome and you're sitting pretty, you could late swap those lineups and actually take down ownership fade very low and be willing to get onto some chalk plays to increase the chance of the rest of your lineup performing, but also maybe even to start thinking about like blocking or things like that, right? That would be another approach. But let's say, for example, that you wanted to take like a very granular approach and even break down your 20 maxes and say, I want to late swap the lineups that are doing well and get chalkier and late swap the lineups that are not doing as well and get off of them. What I would recommend is diving into your entries file, so diving into your entries file, let me see if I can share this here. Let's do this. Now, this is going to require some manual work, and I'm aware of that. But you could, for example, like pull up an entries file, right? So this is the entries file for this slate, and actually look at what lineups are performing, and even by player, right? So like I was watching some videos this morning and people were talking about how they took lineups that had Cooper Kupp in them, right? After the early games. And even though Kupp himself was chalky, if they were well-performing lineups overall, we're willing to get chalkier with the rest of the lineups, right? So like a very good way to do that would be to just like obviously I don't have Cooper Kupp in any of these, but like search for Cooper Kupp, identify the lineups that have him in it, swap those as a group of lineups that don't need to get more contrarian, and take every other lineup that didn't have Kupp just as an example, and swap those separately to get more contrarian. And you can do those just twice in the entry editor. The nice thing here about the entry editor, and I think it's something that people just don't always like, doesn't totally click, is that you can upload it as many times as you want. You can always start over. You're not really like locked into doing this in any way that is that like requires all your lineups to be together or doing everything together. You can break this up as much as you want. So Cody said, yeah, that's what I did this time and it worked, but I wanted to know if there's an automated way. No, so there isn't right now. We're talking about like Ross in particular has kicked around this cool idea of like a smart late swap that dynamically picks up. Oh, I'm still sharing Excel. That dynamically picks up your actual scores and player ownerships and things like that. As the slate is going on, and then late swaps accordingly. It's a really cool idea. I think it's on our radar. It's something that we want to do, but it's obviously a bit of an involved project that we would be kind of starting from scratch on. And we want to make sure that if we do something like that, we do it the right way, and that you are actually adding value to your lineups and the lineups are getting better. But I think this semi-manual approach right now still works pretty well. So let's see. I think this is the next question. Eli said, do you recommend playing beat the score games? And if so, what's the best strategy? They're basically, I probably wouldn't. You're adding in like what I haven't played them very much. I think the reason I haven't ever gotten into them is that a lot of the very sharp and pro players that I talk to don't play them. And I think probably the reason why they're unpopular is because you're kind of adding in this middleman here. Let's just take a look at one of these contests. You're not like playing directly against other people. I know that other people in the contest has an impact on the payouts of the contest overall. Are there beat the scores for? Oh, those are in FanDuel, right? Let's look at FanDuel. Like I feel like it's cash with an extra step. The contests themselves are going to be kind of small, and it feels like you're playing against the house in a way, right? Like they're setting that line, basically, that beat the score line of where they think, okay, so they don't have any for single games, but they're basically setting this beat the score line at where they think. Oh man, I don't know. These are weird. Oh, beat the score historical scores. Okay, yeah, so they have this data, right? So for NFL, for 9-game slates, so when they say, I guess it is really dependent on just what people score. Like there isn't really actually a line set because the payouts are totally up to whoever actually manages to beat that score. I'm sure if I looked at this for long enough, I would figure out why these are negative EV. Because nobody plays these. But I can't off the top of my head. What's the multi-entry limit on these? Okay, so at least one reason not to is that I think you're going to find that these almost never grade out very well from a effective entrance standpoint. So of the players that are in here, it's probably safe to assume that they're pretty sharp. I would say maybe there's an argument for them if you are filling every other good cash game beforehand, which is going to be your single entry 50-50s and double ups, your head-to-heads that are basically filled at the entry limits that fit your bankroll, right? All of those first. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend diving into these. But so, but I realize, Eli, that's not a great answer. And I wish I could tell you a little bit more descriptively of why my intuition is that I don't like these. But what I assume is that based on the fact that they know the historical odds of how likely certain scores are being played and what the established prize pool is for these, that these are flying kind of close to the playing against the house kind of sun. That makes them harder, right? The edge in the cash games that we were talking about here on Thursday with Max was that you're playing in these pools of 10,000 different people trying to build a cash lineup, and there's just not that many good people building cash lineups, right? That's the edge. And it just seems like maybe you are losing that a little bit on those beat the score type contests. So, okay. Renaud here said, new to the family. Welcome to the stream. How are we entering GPPs 648? Is that manual settings? So I assume you're talking about the main slate. So again, these slider settings, we talk a lot about these sliders here. The defaults, when we say defaults, are what just pops up when you just set your contest type. So 648 might be a default to something. 648, yeah. So it's the default 20 max 50K. So you can see it just snap to that when I put 20 max and 50K in. And what this is saying is that we've run thousands of lineups at every single combination of sliders, and the expected value or the ROI of those lineups is best performing when they are set at 6, 4, and 8. So we'd recommend you probably leave them there for a 20 max over 50K entrance. If it is a 150 max, it changes. If it is a single entry at this size, it changes, right? So those are the defaults. Definitely recommend just sticking with the defaults most of the time. In fact, manual mode is actually off by default. And we just show you how we're kind of thinking about it. But these sliders have been back tested against more lineups than like one person could realistically play. So that's why we recommend leaving them where they are. So, Joel said, hence my question about 500 versus 1500 lineups pool. I assume this was, about like checking your gut. Yeah, again, I mean, the more lineups you put in your pool, the more kind of information you're going to have when you're viewing the entire pool to see how viable a certain player is. And also the more flexibility you're going to have to editing exposures and things like that, because you've just got more fuel there. So, let's see. Ronald said, can we talk 10-man builds? 10 mans. I assume you're kind of talking about like leagues, 10-man builds. So there's like these. Let's see if we can find one. Is there one? Are they on FanDuel? They don't have all their contests up for this week. I assume you're talking about the like 10-man leagues that are like basically a GPP payout structure. It's not a cash game. It's not a 10-man 50-50, but it's just like a light payout at the top. Like first we'll get most of the winnings, and then second and third we'll get a little bit. We're built to build lineups for that. So I would say like your best starting point here is going to be to use the default sliders for these kinds of contests, right? You'll get like typically one lineup, single entry, less than 10. You probably don't need a pool of 500. Maybe a pool of 20 is plenty. 20 is plenty. But what you're going to see here is like you don't really need to care about ownership at a contest of that size. We can turn it off completely. We're only even slightly going to consider anything other than average projections. We'll let the ranges of outcomes of players pop in a little bit here. But the most important thing is that we still want to stack. So you can see we'll need to make 2 adjustments to projections to run this build. So let's just adjust to projections very slightly. And yeah, let's just let this run. But these are still like very good lineups for contests of this size. I've actually had a lot of people emailing me recently saying that they're using SaberSim to play like home leagues that are hosted on DraftKings or FanDuel. So people are playing like home leagues where there's just like a private 12-person, 10 or 12-person like contest, DFS contest set up each week. And this actually works really well for that too. So again, you can see like at this point, we're basically just building, let's look at like a few more lineups. It's basically just going to build like kind of little stacks of mostly the best plays, right? With like some variation on there. But you're going to get like these lineups that are built with various combinations of the best point per dollar plays on the slate correlated with one another. And I think that can be a really effective way to build lineups for these contests. Now, I wouldn't be able to, I can't stop myself from at least mentioning that I don't know if these are the best contests to play, primarily for the reason that I think like your odds are that probably most of the people in these contests are going to be pretty sharp. Right? The best players overall in the lobby are going to be filling almost every single contest, and they're going to be maxing almost every single contest. So all these little 10-mans and things like this, these small leagues are going to get just attacked by the sharks. And even if 2 or 3 of them land in your contest, they're making up 30% of the pool, and they're going to be sharp. They're going to be hard contests to win. We recommend players play contests with the highest number of effective entrants as possible. When you're choosing your lineups or you're choosing your contest to play, effective entrance is the number of getting a little fried. The total lineups in the contest divided by the entry limit of any one person. And that is basically going to say how many people could play this contest if everybody in the contest maxed it out, right? If you're playing contests that have over 1,000 effective entrants, that's great. That means that the impact of the best players in the lobby is going to be lower in those overall contests. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I would recommend watching this video, how to double your NFL DFS ROI in 15 minutes. Andy always makes a joke that sounds like a clickbait title, but it's true. And contest selection is probably the best thing you could do for your results overall. So I'd go watch this. We go into a lot more detail about what the best contests are and why they are the best contests. And I would say they probably are not 10-man, 20-man, 50-man, 100-man leagues, because again, the impact of really sharp players in those lobbies is going to be significant, right? Just a few sharper players in those contests, and you maybe just lose your edge. So, cool, but really good question. Don said, I've heard you say you're working to incorporate college football, and I'm being patient. Thank you. I appreciate that. Are you considering SuperDraft? Yeah, so SuperDraft, we're actually probably closer to than we are with college football. College football requires us to build out a model, which is a pretty big project, even to project without game simulations and just use raw projections. College football is a bit of a difficult sport to project. I mention it all the time here that we're not going to put out projections out that we don't 100% agree with and believe in. We have pulled projections before, like for NASCAR, because we were putting out a product that we didn't believe in. And it's a bigger project to incorporate college football. SuperDraft is really mostly just a matter of connecting to SuperDraft and making sure that we're pulling in their slates and everything and players and player IDs and things like that correctly. And that is very much so in progress, and that is close. So SuperDraft support should be here before college football support. So Cody said huge edge, I think, with late swapping. Yeah, I think you are right. And honestly, I would probably do better to focus on that more instead of tilt entering the afternoon slates, because I think that's true. I think you are right with that. So, all right. Let's see. Question from Ryan here came in through Slack. And guys, this one will have to be the last question of the day here today. We've had almost a 2-hour-long stream, which is amazing. Thank you to everybody that participated, asked questions, engaged in chat and everything like that. It was an awesome show here today. But let's get to this last question here. Actually, Jay, I just saw your question come in too, so we'll make that the last question. But these two are the last one, guys. I'll be back here again tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern. So if you have other questions, pop them into the Office Hours channel on Slack. We'll get to these tomorrow. But for now, played every showdown on both sites yesterday. Had a pretty decent amount of money in play. Do you think playing 2% of your bankroll in every single showdown is too aggressive or not a big deal since the slates are independent? Also, adjusting KJ Osborne projection up help me get a first place split on FanDuel. That is awesome. So congratulations on your first place. That's a lot. 2% of your bankroll on every single showdown. I assume that's just for the Sunday games. That's 14 showdowns. That's 28% of your bankroll. That's a lot. I ultimately, that's up to you. I would walk that down. I know those are uncorrelated slates, but Showdown itself is very high variance. I have thought about doing this. I kind of want to, just for fun, to just say that I did, because I think the idea of playing the showdowns, playing every showdown, would just be kind of a fun way to, I don't know, to spend a Sunday. I think Will actually at SaberSim did that this past week, but like I might even think about, like the way I was going to approach that is 5% total across every single showdown, which would be what? That's 5 divided by 14. That's 0.35% bankroll per showdown. It's up to you. You just need to realize like what's like. It also depends on how you're defining your bankroll and how that's defined. But if your bankroll is truly like what you can afford to play and you go bust and are out if you lose it, 28% on a single Sunday to play every single showdown sounds insane to me, to be completely honest. That would be a lot, way too much for me. So I would feel more comfortable playing like 5%, 5% total. And the other thing to remember too is that the individual showdowns themselves are not correlated with one another. So if you're playing just every single showdown, I think this is fine. But if you're also playing the main slate, the results of every single showdown are correlated to your main slate. So you need to be careful about that. And if you're also playing the main slate, I'm not sure that I would rush to play 5% for your main slate lineups and also 2% of every single showdown or something like that, or even 5% total on every single showdown. That's just a lot of bankroll to invest. So, okay, so last question of the day here. Jay said, can you go over what was the average tab versus 99th, 95th, and so forth is for? The percentile tab, or is it best to just leave it alone? Yeah, so good question. What you are looking at here, let's look at one of our other builds because I think it's easier. Okay, reset exposures and fill to 20. Okay, so yeah, so this percentile, average, 25th, 50th, 75th, 85th, 95th, 99th. So what a percentile is it's a way of kind of assigning probabilities to a player's range of outcomes. So a player's 85th percentile outcome, for example, is the outcome they reach 15% of the time. It is on the ceiling side of things. They reach or exceed that outcome 15% of the time. They reach or exceed that outcome 15% of the time. Whoa. Actual scores are potentially working live here on stream. You heard it here first. That's kind of exciting. But anyway, that's what that is basically saying. Their 95th percentile outcome, right, is the outcome they meet 5% of the time. They meet or exceed it 5% of the time. 50th is mathematically the median. It is the middle outcome. It is the outcome that player reaches 50% of the time. It is different from average because average is our mathematical mean, arithmetic mean average of that player's projections across all of our game simulations. The 50th percentile is actually literally their middle outcome of the game simulations. It will differ from average slightly partially because the average is often going to show you scores that aren't actually possible, right? Nick Chubb can't score 22.67. It's not a possible score because it's a mean average, but also medians will typically end up being a little bit lower than the mean score, because the mean is going to be lifted up by basically, I mean, there's a floor of any given player is 0. The ceiling is essentially uncapped. So the extreme ceiling outcomes for players, the 99th and even higher percentile outcomes, will push up the average mean of a player most of the time, but they don't shift the median that heavily. So anyway, bit of a tangent there. In terms of practical advice, what should you use these for? I would say most players, and what is probably just totally fine, is to just leave them at average. They're not going to have a dramatic impact on your lineups overall. They are only really used here as a sorting method. And what you are essentially saying is when you change this, you are saying something to the effect of what is the highest overall scoring lineup if every single player has the 95th percentile outcome, right? So you have the effect of very slightly increasing the lineup's overall upside at the expense of that lineup's average performance, but it's not going to have an enormous impact on your lineups in either direction. I think it's mostly interesting from a research standpoint. One thing that I like to do here, and this kind of requires a little bit of like intuition or just gut feel, but I will set it to a percentile that kind of looks like what a winning score looks like for those contests. So 209-ish is probably going to get you by in like a single entry. If you're playing big contests, you probably need closer to the 95th percentile outcome. Maybe not the 95th, but probably the 90th, which we don't actually have here. But you can then kind of start to check this against like your own intuition of these players and what is realistic. And it can be sometimes a helpful way to like remove or identify players that maybe that you don't want in your pool by asking yourself, like, is this a score that is realistic for this player? Right. This is an interesting one, right? Like Peyton Barber showing up here, 19 points is his 95th percentile outcome. Like, is that a player? Did I believe Peyton Barber really even had like even a 5% chance to score 19 points this weekend? That's essentially what we're saying here. 95th percentile outcome, 5% chance to score 19 or greater. Maybe not. Right. And it can be an interesting way to do that. Another way to judge these lineups or to gauge what lineups might be the best lineups to play, something like that. So that's what it does, and that is how I would use it. But all right, cool. Guys, I think that is going to do it here for today. Thank you for tuning into the stream. It was a great one here, almost 2 hours. Congratulations again to all the winners of the contest this week, and also the giveaway winners from the start of the show here. I will make sure I get an email out to everybody letting you guys know that you won and how you will expect to get your prizes before the end of the day today. We will be back here again for office hours again tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern. So we've got the Lions and Packers showdown here tonight. Hopefully we get a decent game. The NFL has been very fortunate so far that every single primetime game they've put on TV has actually been pretty entertaining, at least by my metrics. So we'll see tonight with like a 12 point spread, how this one turns out. But should be fun. Should be fun to play the showdown anyway in DFS. Enjoy the game tonight. I will talk to you guys all tomorrow again, 2 p.m. Eastern. And until then, see ya. Take care.